Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue. Ultimately, this review comes off of the fact that I was looking at a lot of the other Power Ranger seasons. And on this channel, there's going to be a playlist, kind of a review of different kind of Power Ranger seasons. So you can go through that playlist and ultimately get my consensus about Power Rangers Samurai, or you can probably hear some kind of in general thoughts of Power Rangers, and an entire review where I kind of go through all the shows and kind of at that time tell you, like, okay, I've only seen this show, or I've only seen the pilot of this show, or this and that. And so there, in fact, it seems that people overwhelmingly started to view all those. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to talk about Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue, because ultimately this show was one where I was just like, I don't know if this was a good show or not. I don't remember this being a good show or not, so now I'm going into it and reviewing it now and trying to get my consensus of if it was a good show or not. So going into this, yeah. So we have in this show a very much soap opera like appeal to this show. It seems that there's a lot more time being presented of you watching the actual characters rather than the Power Ranger moments themselves. It seems like a lot of the Power Ranger moments seems to be a non-stop gimmick to merchandise the crap out of things. Good grief. I don't know how every single episode they would have some additional thing to sell you on. It was like they would have just this consistent build of, like, okay, hey, here's this sword, but then here's another sword. But then wait, here's these other, like, accessory things to the Rangers. And okay, wait, there's a different looking power up thing that's on somebody's wrist. Oh wow. Like, man, this show, like, it takes the Power Ranger point of it and tries to, like, market it as it trying to be like, how can we push out all of this product? And that seems so bizarre. This show to me doesn't follow the normal formula of a Power Ranger show. Even I thought that the very opening of this season was so weird to me, and the approach of the villains were so weird. I was looking at this and I'm like, you know what? The villains for this show do not fit the show whatsoever. It feels like the villains were just, like, randomly recycled things that they found from some other show, and they're like, hey, how about we do this? Yeah, go with it. That's what it feels like to me. It doesn't really feel like these villains fit this show, and there might be some interesting characters of villains in the show, but the villains seem so random. Plus, yeah, you have minions that the Power Rangers seem to rarely ever fight, or the minions have to be mixed in with the main villain bad guy itself. A lot of the villain-ash like characters for every episode, I couldn't help and tell you what those were, to be brutally honest. If they had names, if any of the monsters had names in these episodes, I wouldn't remember any lick of any of them. I do remember the main villains, though. I do have a synopsis of who they all are. So yeah, you have of course, Jinxer, who ultimately, like, has these rhyming, like, sayings, like he's the Demon Etrigan from DC comic books. Vampira, Vampira? Yeah, Vampira. you rarely see how many times that you've probably heard all these that kind of approach the actual name of who these people are. And Diabolico comes up as the main focal villain for a lot of this until we ultimately get Olympius, which ultimately is kind of like he starts out as a baby in the show, but eventually he matures. So going into this, here's one thing that I've kind of started to realize when not only watching multiple Power Ranger shows at this point, but here's my thing that I've realized. Is it that every single Blue Ranger has to come from out of a water-like background? I've started to realize that now. I swear. The Blue Ranger in this episode comes out of the water in the pilot episode. The Blue Ranger in Ninja Storm is a surfer. The Blue Ranger from Power Ranger Samurai is a swimmer, to the point where he was going to do some competition of swimming. And so now I've realized every single Blue Ranger has a water background. Billy evidently had some horror story about him being supposedly attacked by a fish in one episode. So is that his water background? Is that his, like, he had something about a fish attacking him in some episode when he was a kid, and they had to do an entire episode about that. And so is that Billy's water background? That he was terrified of water? I'm going to have to go through every single one of these episodes and double check to see if every single character has a water background. Wild Force is going to be pretty easy because Wild Force, the Blue Ranger, is a shark in that episode, so we can pretty much guarantee that he has a water background. But yeah, every single Blue Ranger comes out of the water in every single pilot of this thing. And so now I have to make a consensus of that. And now I have to figure out every single water like thing. Does oh my god. Jungle Fury I think I don't think there's a Blue Ranger in Jungle Fury. Or I don't remember there being a. I was thinking. No, I'm still thinking of Ninja Storm. Yeah. Anyways, going into this series, yeah, kind of moot point. So Lightspeed Rescue has a very much approach of a soap opera, a sitcom, kind of approach to it. It mostly focuses more on the characters rather than the Power Rangers kicking and punching people in the face repetitiously, which I thought was really odd. I'm like, man, I've gone through 20 episodes of this, and it doesn't feel like I've gotten enough Power Rangers moments. But I still like the stories overall. If anything, like, especially once we get to the Titanium Ranger, I was like, you know what? Like, these things are really trying to go out of their way to win me over, and very much give me a reason to invest in every single one of these characters. I really like how the episodes are very clever. They're very smart. It feels like if you're either adult or a younger person, you could enjoy this show for what it is, because reasonably, it doesn't feel like a show that is dumbed down for it feels kind of like a normal show. It feels like whoever was writing this was trying to write it for just anybody. And so I think if you're a much older person, you could tie yourself to the show and enjoy it for what it is, because it's not trying too much to be something forcibly for a younger audience, which some of these Power Rangers shows do that. And then you're kind of going into this going, I don't like this season. So going into this, reasonably, you have some characters that I think have too many repetitious tropes. There's some people that, when going at this, they only have one goal in mind, and it seems like every episode has to be a part of that one goal, and that could seem really annoying at points. There are some characters that I really do think that there is not enough going on with them, or that like like especially I think Kelsey, who is the Yellow Ranger, I'm like, it doesn't really seem like she has enough going on in this show. Neither does the Blue Ranger either. It kind of seems like both Kelsey and Chad are just kind of like left to their own devices. Like sometimes there is an episode that I think does really put them to the forefront, but every other time it seems like they're just background, just to be like, hey, you're here, but who cares? Because there's a lot of other people that are very much being to the forefront a lot more, or consistently are having their camera time compared to others. And yeah, just it feels like there are definitely some characters that are just there, but who cares, sadly enough. So going into this, yeah, we have villains that seem weirdly, bizarrely added in, and they don't make sense. Recently, we have characters that are very much having like story arcs in this thing. Uh, but yeah, so if I hadn't mentioned it, the pilot episode is the weirdest introduction of this series that I've ever seen in a Power Ranger show. And because I've seen a lot of other Power Ranger shows, and this one has the weirdest pilot. It just has the weirdest, goofiest pilot that I've ever seen in my life. Basically, having it to where, like, at first, like well, I'll get to that in spoilers, but it's just the weirdest pilot, and it's just the weirdest approach to getting the Power Rangers, and I think a lot of this show might be copy and paste from Power Rangers Samurai, but because it feels like almost one and the same. Because if a lot of it feels basically the same thing. But anyway, so I think I overall, for the first 20 of these episodes, I really did enjoy the show. But also, I was just kind of like, well, because I think this show probably invigorates me to try to watch shows that came up around this same time. To ultimately see if these shows were as of good quality of some stuff that I kind of skipped around on. Because there were some shows I'm like, I don't like the pilot of this at all. This seems like a boatload of garbage. But maybe it's just the pilot. Maybe the pilot was garbage, but maybe there's something good or solid here that I can enjoy later on. Um, I think eventually I really need to get into watching more of Power Rangers Mystic Force, because reasonably I only saw the pilot, and the pilot starts off with a story arc, which ultimately doesn't really showcase much of anything, because it just has to say too much freaking backstory of stuff before you even get to the Power Rangers point, which sounded bizarre to me. Here's the thing. I think certain episodes for this are kind of milked out way too much. Reasonably, there's too much story going on, But also, there are at times when I'm like, what is going on in this show? Because here's what happens. Like in the first two episodes, you have to take an entire episode to do two certain things. In the first episode, you have to build up the Rangers and then eventually have them morph and then have them fight out this villain, and that's how like the episode resolves. In the second episode, it goes from like morphing to like having an entire dedicated episode to them being in their Zords. Like basically the cutscene for the Zords. Oh my god! I'm like looking at my watch with this Zord transformation. I'm like, man, this feels like the longest Zord transition that I think I've ever seen in my life. And miraculously, they keep going into these like Zord transformations, or it seems like I don't know how many iterations of Zords that they have in this show in just 20 episodes. Like, I think I've seen like, okay, here's these one Zords, but wait, there's other Zords. But wait, now there's a different kind of approach of a Zord. Oh, wait, now you have another character that comes in, and he has to have his own Zord, and now, like, you have, like, 20 different iterations of one Zord, and I'm like, good God, I'm like, this is just every single episode is built up to be, like, some, merchandiser's like dream of sorts, and it's just like everything is just so like built up to go, okay, well, hey, yeah, do you like the Power Rangers? Well, do you like them with a gold shimmer? That's what I was expecting. I was expecting every single episode for their like uniforms to slightly be different in some way, to where ultimately I'd see them having like some kind of bizarrish like gold flare, or some like bizarrish attachment that made no sense, just so you can put out another different kind of action figure out there. Have some kind of gold tint to some of their uniforms, so you can like kind of merchandise it that way. That's what I was thinking with some of this episode, that every single time I would come in here, I would just have like a different looking Rangers every single episode, so they can do different action figures, because this was crazy to me. I was like, man, like the Power Ranger part is overwhelming, uh, and or the soap opera part is so overwhelming to the Power Ranger part, where you don't care about the Power Ranger part, and the Power Ranger part is just a merchandising like ploy. So reasonably, it gets to the aspect of you just going like, man, I like this story in this episode, but like once we get to that Power Ranger part, the most important part of this thing, I don't care about it. Which seems so weird to say, because you're waiting for that Power Ranger part, and it seems like if you go through and spam the crap out of these 20 episodes, the Power Ranger part seems like a thing that never comes, or you never remember the Power Ranger part, because it just seems like a smaller portion of this episode as a whole. It's yeah, it's a weird watch through for Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue. So that is ultimately all that I wanted to say in a very cryptic like sense. I'm not saying that this is a bad Power Ranger show. I just feel that the Power Ranger part is not powerful enough. But I think that the story is very clever, and I think it's a lot cleverer than a lot of these other shows, because a lot of the seasons, a lot of the times, just get phoned in, because recently they just stopped caring, because they've made so much money off this thing, and it's been on for so long that they just don't care. They just stopped caring. They just stopped getting you invested in the team as a whole, and got just kind of got lazy and just went with whatever was um, whatever could just be the easiest for them to do, to keep people quasi invested, but not good and well enough. So let's go into that double fire time, break into spoilers at the end of the day. Anyways, yeah, probably for this, the kind of just overall uh, thing that I just did here could just be enough for people. But if you want to hear kind of a little bit more detail of some of the episodes, um, more than likely, I apologize if I backpedaled through that portion of this, or if I'm backpedaling through the spoiler variation. I apologize, but yeah. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time is about that time again to spoil this show. So soap opera, yes. So I'm not going to go into every single episode in order. I'm not going to break this all down as like episode 1. This is where stuff went real. and like tell you like episode titles and then go into every single detail of everything. I'm going to jump around probably a lot within these 20 episodes. Whatever kind of pops into my mind in time to think of through things. So, episode 1, we bizarrely have these people, uh, some Middle Eastern quasi like people that are all at this like desert area, that are all going into this place to seemingly unlock this these ghosts at first, because you have these stubborn people that are all just gonna do. They're going through some desert island and they're like, hey, how about we go into this place and unlock this thing that we shouldn't unlock? And they go about doing that, and they unleash all these ghosts at first. But then these ghosts turn into being demons, and so all the while you have regular paramedics and uh, firefighters all doing their normal regular job. They are starting to all of a sudden see these ghosts appear, and so they then realize that, hey, something's going on, something's going goofy. And bizarrely, all the while, eventually it seems that there's this government that can easily realize that villains are popping up everywhere, so they get out these men in black to recruit all of these Power Rangers, and it's the weirdest. You have all these men in black coming out to all these people and just saying, "Hey, we need you," and pulling people out of the pool and getting Joel, the space cowboy, which I thought was so weird. Yeah, this guy that's wearing a cowboy hat all the time. I don't get it. But anyways, so we ultimately have the paramedic trying to retrieve the fireman, and ultimately telling him like, yeah, you're gonna be our Red Ranger. So we ultimately have these people all getting together, and they are all going to morph and fight off whoever monster is of this episode. All the while, we have this Captain Mitchell, who is, of course, the real Zordon. Like, this is this season's Zordon, but he's a real guy, and he's ultimately kind of telling them what all to do. He's queuing them up. He's microphoning them up to tell them what all to do. Ultimately, he is the father of the Pink Ranger of this episode of this show, and then ultimately we'll find out that he has another surprise thing going on later on. So Captain Mitchell, this guy, like, I don't know why that they have to like not only like it seems the more and more we go about this show, we not only have to like present the Power Rangers in a good light, but then we also have to try to make this guy look good really as well. Like as if he knew more than the Power Rangers did or this and that. Um, but here's the thing, through some of these episodes, like it feels like there's some real true investigation going on. And man, do I love those kind of episodes where we have like Carter in one episode having to do some investigation later on, realizing that he's like, oh my god, like something that Captain Mitchell told me that I was like thinking, I'm like, no, I should do this. And Captain Mitchell was actually right all along. And then Carter found out later that, oh my God, he was right. And I was wrong. Like, man, like, I need to eat some crow and come to him and say, you know what? Like, I was so bullheaded and I was thinking, I'm like, I think I should have went and saved this person, but you told me not to. And then I realized I was wrong. You were right. I'm always gonna follow your lead, man. Good. It's like you made a good call there. Man, did I like that episode? You had like Carter who um was going and trying like desperately wanting to uh save some people, and instead Captain Mitchell told him to not do that, and so people got hurt in the process. And then Carter eventually found out that is like later on when he did the whole investigation thing that ultimately if he would have kept what he was doing was keeping those people alive, because ultimately there was some kind of very flammable explosives that would have annihilated this entire building and killed everybody. And so, yeah, good points for Captain Mitchell because he knew better. So, going into this, we have Captain Mitchell who seems to be like either the know-it-all or the guy that like knows what's best, and then also he also becomes like a hero for some of the people in the show. So anyways, we basically eventually get these random Ash-like villains that to me make no sense to be on this show. To me, we get Jinxer who has to rhymingly get certain villains to come in here. There are some really visually interesting villains coming onto this show. Like, I think the elephant one kind of, the elephant episode kind of was like, that like is a visually cool looking character. Recently, a lot of the monsters to me, they kind of very much copy and paste look to be like Godzilla to me in a lot of ways. It seems like when they were approaching the monsters in this season, it seems like they were blatantly looking at like Godzilla a lot when looking at these things. Recently, there were times when the monsters would not only attack the Rangers, but they would also like try to attack other things besides just the Rangers. It seems like one episode they would try to attack some volcano, and then the Rangers were trying to stop these villains from attacking this volcano, and then so eventually the villains would just say, "Hey, you know what? Like we could probably beat the Power Rangers right now, but instead I think that this volcano is going to erupt so horribly to kill this entire town that us as villains don't need to do anything, so let's just retreat now." Some interesting things going on with the villains that were trying to outsmart the heroes. Like there is also one episode where you have a villain like trying to get into the Power Rangers headquarters and trying to bring all the villains into said Power Rangers headquarters. I thought that was like yeah, heck yeah. Why don't we have that every single season? You have it to where a villain just annihilates this person's headquarters or their command centers or their whatevers. Like, you would think that that would be number one thing to do, would always be that a villain is going to outsmart the heroes, and while they're off gallivanting, fighting minions or whatever, the real villain is going to just destroy the place that they've been in for so long, their headquarters. Ultimately pushing the hero much more to just like, I'm gonna get vengeance and I'm gonna take this person out, and like, he destroyed the like my second home and I'm gonna go after him. So going into this first pilot episode, we have it to where Power Rangers are getting abducted by these seemingly men in black, and so they all morph, and then they all take out whatever monster it was in this week, because every single monster is so generic in this episode. You completely forget who they even were. But every single monster does look Godzilla-ish. It was weird to me. And then sometimes we have it to where there are monsters that are like kind of plays through episode to episode to episode, but then eventually they get built into being one singular monster, which I thought was really cool. So let me reiterate that. So what happens is we have one monster per one episode, and that goes on for 3 episodes. And then we take those same 3 monsters and fuse them into one big monster in one episode. I'm like, wow, that is awesome. I like that. To ultimately, it gives you an investment of wanting to watch the previous 3 episodes to then realize that there is one monster that is a culmination of the last 3 episodes. That is so smart to do that, because ultimately it makes you invest in the entire season, and I think it's great for a show to have payoffs like that. Or even have it to where you have one episode that brings you back to an older episode, like bringing back an old monster. Like, I think there was in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, you would have just a crap ton of monsters in those episodes. But then I think there was one Halloween episode where you just had a cluster of all of these monsters coming in and attacking the Power Rangers at that time. And I was like, man, this is brilliant, because looking at it, it's like, here's a giant investment of all these monsters that you had costumes for that now you're going to reuse here and like give us a great investment. And I think they did that a lot, where ultimately you would just see monsters having an entire investment fulfilled, to where you're just seeing a ton of monsters all attack the Power Rangers at once. Ultimately, I love episodes like that, where there's just a huge cluster of monsters all attacking the Power Rangers all at once. I think I want to see every single episode of that happening, where there's just a huge cluster of monsters all attacking the Rangers all at once. Because I love those episodes. Those are probably my favorite episodes. Or is just like, this makes no sense. Why is there so many freaking... Why is there so many monsters in this episode? There's a huge batch of them everywhere. But anyways, so going into this, you have the blandish looking characters. You have some weird baby monster, which I was like, this is interesting. Like, we have like a baby Yoda like approach of going into this thing, of a thing that is eventually going to mature and become a real, true, legitimate threat in this show. And that was so interesting to me to see, like, a metamorphosis of a character that is built over time. Like, again, there is some really, really good payoffs coming into this show that when looking at it, it's like it comes off as weird, but then you're like, well, okay, this is a great investment. There's so many good things. There's so many good quality things coming from this show. There is some like pulling at your heartstrings like moments, because ultimately this show has to do that as well. There are some kind of clunky episodes, like I think the one episode where you have the bully that is going and fighting Chad, and like that episode, I thought that like God, this episode is such a filler episode, but I think the writers were desperately going like, you know what? It seems that Chad and Kelsey like are probably gonna start complaining that they're gonna have Bupkis nothing to do. So let's give them an entire episode just about them, because I think they deserve an episode devoted for them, and then we'll just go right back into okay. Let's give Carter his episode. Uh, Dana is just kind of consistently like in the forefront because her and Captain Mitchell has something consistently brewing or going on. Um, there's some stuff really hammed up where ultimately Captain Mitchell have a, a birthday to celebrate, and ultimately it alludes to a son of Captain Mitchell, or for Dana, a brother that had died. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting to throw this in here. I'm like, man, like, you don't see a Power Ranger show where they, like, do this kind of thing where, like, you could just be celebrating a person who would have still been here. But then, but I was like, wouldn't it be nice if they just not have to do a story about this person and just left this like it was? But no. They talk about a birthday party for, or they throw a birthday thing for a person that had supposedly passed away. But then they end up having to forcibly do a story about this said person and then build him up to be the sixth Ranger. So we have Ryan. So we have to where Carter is at first trying the titanium Power Ranger power, and it of course does not work for him. And I'm like, wait a minute, why would you have the Red Ranger be also the Titanium Ranger? Like, do you want one character to be two different Rangers? That doesn't quite make sense to me. Would you just have really have had Carter be the Titanium Ranger and then have just grabbed anybody else to be the Red Ranger, or to be would the Blue Ranger be the Red Ranger then? I just don't think that like it was a waste of time to have Carter try to be the Titanium Ranger, because obviously we knew that wasn't going to work. We have to have somebody come in here and be the Titanium Ranger. Like this isn't SPD where eventually anybody can eventually become a Power Ranger at any form of time, because eventually people just get better than one another, and then you just consistently have the colors change to be okay, well, Sky, you're now the Blue Ranger, and ultimately this guy is so great he's going to be the new Red Ranger. And then eventually I think the Green Ranger eventually becomes the Red Ranger because he is on the 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 red episode, the God, what is it? The all red Power Ranger episode. I don't remember what it's called during this time now. But anyways, so and probably more than likely someone will tell me the title of that episode, or probably I'll eventually see it at some point because I see a lot of Power Ranger stuff now that I've kind of looked into some Power Ranger-ish like stuff. But anyways, so Mitchell, Ryan Mitchell. So here's what happens. So Ryan ends up basically coming back from the grave and just walking into the Power Rangers headquarters without anybody batting an eye. And he immediately opens up Captain Mitchell's safe and takes the titanium morpher and walks out of this headquarters with, again, nobody batting an eye. And then all of a sudden, like, we have this, like, Green Power Ranger story going on that basically is, like, every single beat just like Tommy's story verbatim. And I thought that this was kind of hilarious because I'm like, dude, this is just like Tommy's story. Like, you have Titanium Ranger at first being very much a villain, and he's working for Diabolico. Ultimately, we have Diabolico seeming like he's getting like an hourglass being put on him to just be like, okay, you're only going to be a big bad guy until X amount of time, because if you're not going to be successful, like, we're going to have to change the rings of things. Then ultimately Olympius will get in and have his time. So we have Ryan, who at first becomes like a very much Tommy-esque like character, evil Tommy, and reasonably it gets to the aspect of him trying to take on the Rangers, but then eventually the Rangers keep adding on more tech that eventually just like gets Ryan and or Titanium Ranger caught off guard, and so he just gets overwhelmed, and it gets to the point where eventually Ryan reveals who he is only via the eye portion of his mask, and then Captain Mitchell, with only seeing this guy's eyes, realizes that it is his son, and he pulls the Rangers off to retreat. Ultimately realizing that now he has to tell the Rangers why he had made them retreat, because they're going to confront him with this. So Dana eventually realizes that it is her brother, and now she has to kind of like there's some interesting things going on here. So we eventually have to kind of replay the moments of the mistake where Ryan didn't actually die, but otherwise got grabbed by some demon and basically told, like, yeah, I'm gonna keep this guy, and keep him till he's 20 years old. So we have it to where so Ryan eventually is forcibly going to be a villain, and I kind of like the build up of this story. I kind of liked where we eventually have to approach how this whole Ryan character gets introduced. But then eventually, once Ryan decides to turn good, because ultimately he has a moment with his father where they're kind of teetering against this hill, and his father is going to give up his life for him, then Ryan like saves his father back, and like it's a very interesting moment. I really like it. It's kind of cool. But anyway, so we get to the aspect of all this story brewing up, and it's really interesting. But then eventually we have to where the villains get back at Ryan for when he finally turns good by giving him this weird, bizarrish, like, snake tattoo, where I'm like, oh my god, this is exactly how they're going to forcibly make Ryan be the Green Power Ranger, the Jason David Frank story, the Tommy story, where basically now the Sixth Ranger can't be with the other five. They're basically gonna tell him, yeah, you need to rest. You can't morph. Don't go out there. Don't fight because reasonably, we don't want you to because of this snake tattoo. To where he stubbornly does whatever he does with the snake tattoo, anyways. And so eventually it comes back to literally bite him. But because he keeps using his powers anyways, and the snake keeps growing and changing and whatever, to the point where they keep forcibly wanting to tell him um, don't morph anymore, and to where he ultimately has to go some bizarre random Ash like place to fight this snake and outsmart it and kill it, to where ultimately it kills his tattoo, to where he can be completely 100% fine to be a Power Ranger again. So here's the thing. We have Dana, who is tied with Captain Mitchell, and they have their family tied relationship that happens a lot in this show. We have Carter, who is very much wanting to seemingly like rescue a million people in this show. And then we have Joel, who is very much desperately wanting to get a date with this one scientist. And funny enough how it seems like Joel very much is this guy who is consistently trying to date this woman under the down low, and there's this consistent thing going on of the will they won't they kind of thing, because Joel keeps pressing and this girl is like, yeah, you know what, you know what, like she makes up this rule that tells them that they can't date, even though Joel is still like, well, I'm still gonna try anyways. So ultimately, like, Joel tries to, even at one episode, tries to get a kid to ask for her to go on a date with him, but instead the kid asks for her to go on a date with the kid, and then they go to some aquarium or something, and then they leave, and it's like, haha, outsmarted you again. So I'm assuming eventually that Joel and this woman end up getting together, but you kind of have to always have these like relationship things going on in these shows, the will they won't they's, or the outsmarting, or the guy that is just stubbornly like, I'm just gonna keep trying this no matter what. Going on to this show, reasonably, we have in one episode the big outsmarting like thing is we have when eventually we have Demon Baby, who eventually turns into Prince Man, or Prince Olympius. We ultimately have him very smart and intelligently do a lot much more different things than any of the other characters are doing. He basically collects all the, like, a bulk of all the Rangers right away, and then eventually sneaks into the headquarters, and then eventually he basically has all of his, like, demon minions come in and try to attack the headquarters, but eventually somebody is looking at a camera angle, and they're like, oh my god, all these monsters are in this part of the headquarters, everybody red alert. So recently it seems that the whole headquarters of this place, it seems like at first this seems like a very much underwater headquarters, but then eventually it seems like it could be just anywhere. Ultimately, I remember like SPD, like it seems like there was clearly one kind of headquarters, and it was in one spot, and they would always consistently go to this camera shot every single time when they would go to these headquarters. And the command center for Mighty Morphin and stuff like that, it's all it's all kind of the same after a while. So, anyways, recently, yeah, there's some interesting episodes. There's some out of 20 episodes, I'm probably bashing through a lot of this stuff, and I'm not going through a heavily amount of detail for everything. But when looking at some of these, there's some episodes that are pretty good, and then there's some where there's some real stretching. Um, if anything, there was like one episode where Captain Mitchell let them all go on like to have a day off, and so like that episode still has to have some kind of story where Captain Mitchell and Carter are kind of going off on their own, but then eventually realize that they have to do some work anyways. That basically like Carter is still adamant about training and stuff like that, so Captain Mitchell is going to train along with Carter and pretty much beat the crap out of them when they're training together, which I thought was funny. But then eventually we find out that Carter ultimately has some mysterious fireman hero that he idolized over, and basically that is the whole reason why he became a firefighter, is just because of this one hero-esh like guy. And we end up finding out that that same fireman hero is actually Captain Mitchell himself, and ultimately that's the main reason why Captain Mitchell, eventually, when he had this authority to elect all these Power Rangers, that's the exact same reason why he ended up recruiting Carter as a Red Ranger, because he has been watching over him ever since he had rescued him years before. Kind of an interesting thing, but I'm just kind of like, really? It's kind of I don't know. There's some of these episodes where they're kind of, excuse me. There's some of these episodes where there's really good story. Some of them are kind of clunky, and plus like a day off kind of episode is kind of just like, even on a day off episode, they're gonna get some action in here anyways, to where it's ultimately not gonna be 100% a day off. Where people are just going to keep doing usually anyways. It's not like all of a sudden the Power Rangers uh, are not going to be morphing and kicking butt in this episode. So that's where eventually it gets into. So yeah, interesting like episodes, but I think that's all I wanted to go into through this review. I'm sure there's probably a lot of episodes that I neglected on or forgetted on. There was like one episode where I thought was kind of interesting, where you'd have this like switch up where you have Captain Mitchell specifically sending Dana to get her to retrieve some guy uh, that has like a tackle box and stuff like that, because ultimately this guy and Captain Mitchell are going to go on a fishing trip. And so Dana is like, God, why did I have to go and find this guy and retrieve him for Captain Mitchell's fishing trip? But then the other Power Rangers are all going and transitioning this highly valuable uh, fuel source or fuel thing or equipment like device. And the villains want this as well. So they ultimately try to sneak uh, to get to this fuel device. And so ultimately they fight out the Power Rangers, and ultimately they try to get this device, but then they realize that there is nothing in this device with the Power Rangers, and then ultimately the villain is realizing, you know what, why is it that there's only 4 of you Power Rangers here? And ultimately Dana is the one who ultimately has the actual fuel device or whatever, but it's in with the guy with the tackle box, and he is just disguising himself as him going on a fishing trip, even to Dana herself. So yeah, some kind of clever writing going on, some interesting things going on here. I thought, like, yeah, some of the episodes were actually pretty good. So, anyways, I'm gonna get out here. If ultimately you guys want me to do the rest of this season, or ultimately go into any other Power Rangers season, let me know. I will probably do so. It seems like, bizarrely, every single one of these reviews for Power Rangers are going well, so I think that's repetitiously why I keep going into doing much more of them. So, at the end of the day, I just want to say goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.